Tonight we have some lovely guests with us, Tobi and Mishael Wiedemann, and they're all the way from Christchurch in the deep south, where apparently it's been a very lovely day. So that's really cool. Now they're going to be talking to us about story time, about reading books and telling stories to your kids. So we're really looking forward to that. Our aim with Family Matters is to encourage God-centered marriages and families, to help relationships grow and thrive by providing practical encouragement and help and support through teaching and experience. And so I think that's what we're going to be doing tonight. So welcome, Tobi and Mishael.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
It's really important to read to our children from a very young age, but what books do we read? Public libraries have a seemingly unending selection of books, challenging us to make wise selections. Tobi and Mishael have sifted through thousands of children's books and will share their thoughts not only on what makes a good book as far as the words and the pictures go, but what makes a good book when it comes to bringing up a godly family. Parents and grandparents, aunties and uncles, and especially children you love, all are going to benefit from this discussion tonight. Because what we're going to be doing is to show you, to share with you how stories make a massive influence on our kids. Just wanted to share with you a couple of short Bible passages. The first one comes from Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. Above all else, says, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. And what we're going to be talking about tonight is about guarding our children's hearts through the things that they read and hear. And the other one comes from Psalm 78, verses 1 to 4. And it reads like this: O my people, listen to my instructions. Open your ears to what I am saying, for I will speak to you in a parable. I will teach you in hidden lessons from our past, stories we have heard and known, stories our ancestors handed down to us. We will not hide these truths from our children. We will tell the next generation about the glorious deeds of the Lord, about his power and his mighty wonders. So I thought that hopefully would be a good introduction to the stories, the sort of stories that we would be reading to our kids. So tell us about your family. Tell us about your introduction to how does story time come into your routine for a day?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to clarify one little point, which is that we may have read thousands of books between us, but we haven't necessarily sifted through them, and we're not necessarily wanting to come across as the big authority on all books and what have you. It's just just I guess sharing a little bit some of the things that we discovered just by having kids and looking a little bit more critically at some of the stuff. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
But I guess it's having kids is just a natural progression that you want to read some stories to them when they're little, and with the first one you probably overdo it a little bit. You put those black and white little books in front of them straight when they're like barely born, and make sure that they get the visual stimulation. But other than that, it's just as soon as you have kids, bringing story time into the routine, I guess, was something that came naturally to us. We just love books anyway, so that's how that really got it started.
So I think,
what are the age groups of your what are the ages of your children? What age range are you looking at in your family?
so. Our oldest is 13, just turned 13 a couple of weeks ago, and then the next one down is 10, and then we have a 7-year-old, almost 8. She turns 8 on Wednesday, and
Wow.
Then we have a 5-year-old. So yeah, 5 to 13, and all girls. So
All
a lot of
girls.
talking in our house.
I guess that means there's a certain type of book that you'll mostly read that are particularly pertinent to girls or of interest to girls.
Yeah, yes and no. So I think what maybe made me think a little bit more critically about books was when our oldest turned 5 and we made the decision to school her at home. And I kind of went and got a curriculum that was quite literature based. So there were a lot of books that they gave you to read to the kids. And so that curriculum sort of gave books designed for boys and girls. And we read all of the books. And actually, I found that the girls have loved the books that you might think are more designed for boys just as much.
Okay.
If it's a great story, then it's going to appeal to both, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah, actually, we have read quite a few different kind of books with boy main characters and female main characters.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So was there any particular moment or any particular book or anything like that that sort of started you thinking about, hang on, there's a choice here. There's good books and there's bad books. I mean, we all start to get books out of the library when our kids are little, but when do we start? When did you start thinking about it?
Well, for me, and I think I mentioned this when we had this little chat last week. For me, it sort of struck home when I was reading a picture book to Maria on Peppa Pig. Peppa Pig was kind of the rage at the time, with lots of them in the library, and I saw that at other people's places as well. And I was reading this Peppa Pig story to Maria, and it was about how the mum went off to meet up with her girlfriends at the fire brigade, the volunteer fire brigade that she was a member of, and the dad stayed at home cooking barbecue, and he burned the barbecue, and the fire brigade had to come and put out what these clots of dads had done. The mums had to come to the rescue, and it's just like, well, something doesn't quite stack up here. And I looked through some of the books, and there was always the dad was the idiot who mucked up, and it was just a little bit of the wrong kind of picture here that I didn't want to be have the dads always being portrayed as that. And I thought, well, not that I can't take a joke, but when it's constantly in those books, you start to think, well, that's not how I want to have my child view the dad. And so it sort of seemed to me like there was a sort of bit of an underlying theme that was going on in those books that were trying to push a little bit of thing. And once you start noticing it, it sort of at least for me, I started to think, well, wow, there's in a lot of the more modern books, there's certain underlying currents that we're feeding our children that I don't think are actually helpful. So.
Did you find other themes as well, like other sort of?
Well, as the years
were coming through that were not the way God would present it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't go to the library as often as Mishael does. I've only been a handful of times to collect books with the kids, but even on those few occasions, for me anyway, I would immediately be able to spot a lot of books in there now where you have two mums or two dads, and we're talking picture books for little kids. Not even talking about any of the older fiction or whatever, just the picture books. And I'm going like, wow, there's a real agenda about all the stuff that's being pushed at the moment, whether that's about gender or about two dads, two mums, or a lot of broken marriages. Books about where there's only one mum and then the kid has to go to the dad, or there's just things like that where I go like, well, what happened to actually portraying what is actually wholesome, what is a good family?
Yeah.
So you were seeing a lot of breakdown of good family values and
Yep.
the wholesomeness that God wants our families to be like. You were seeing a breakdown of that coming through in the books.
Yeah. And there's some books which are really forceful in their message, and they kind of jump out, but then a lot of other ones as well where you may not have two mums or two dads, you might still have a broken marriage. So even in some of the more harmless ones, you still have books where what is a good, positive, God intended environment of a mum and a dad and a happy family, it's portrayed as as that's not the norm anymore. So all the books have something where something is broken, but that's okay, that's fine, that's the norm. So not that there's something, obviously there are situations which are like that, which are bad, but that's not necessarily people's fault. But what it seems to be is that it's been taken up and portrayed as the norm. If you know
And
what
I
I mean?
think the scary thing is that this is in kids' books. And so by the time they become teenagers or young adults, or even when their even as us as parents are probably getting influenced by them, to think, like you say, that this is the norm. And this is the way society is, which, well, maybe society is, but it's not the way God wants us to be.
Yeah.
Mishael, you were talking to us last week about some interesting contrasts that you saw between some of the older books, 50 or 100 years ago, compared to the newer books. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so I actually went to the library last week. I thought, I'll try and get some examples, because it always helps if you can sort of see examples.
Yeah,
and
that'd
so
be great.
In a very embarrassedly tried to grab books that I would normally avoid. And like 30 really bad books, hoping no one was like watching me. But it was really interesting just grabbing these books, and I wasn't kind of like fishing past all of the really good books to find the couple of bad books at the back of the shelf. The books I found, there's stacks of books like this. So yeah, what I found, one of the things which sort of Toby's mentioned as well, was the way adults and parents and teachers are treated in books today. There's like a total disrespect for parents now. In fact, parents are sort of seen as a bit of an object of ridicule, something to sort of mock or laugh at, or they are uninvolved or presented as kind of stupid. So here's a book that I found called Daddy Popcorn's Guide to Parent Training. Can see that?
Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
And this is just a little excerpt sort of close to the front of the book, where the child says, parents, like my mum and dad on the other hand, can be weird, daggy and mean. They're so complicated. Example, grounding me for the holidays. I mean, seriously, who does that besides a police officer practicing her incarceration skills? Parents seem to thrive on making life difficult and embarrassing for kids. And then the next page, important note, this book is NFP, not for parents. It contains material they may find offensive and, quite frankly, they don't need to know about. Warning, this book contains traces of nuts. Many parenting experts are known as nuts, not unlike tomato sandwiches, because they're hard and crusty on the outside and soggy in the middle. So you kind of got pretty sort of disrespectful, strong language about parents. And this is just one example, but this kind of language is found in a lot of the books that I looked at from the library.
But yeah,
just another one.
And it's dressed in humour, so it makes it seem not quite so bad, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's presented as humorous. Yeah. So the kids are meant to laugh and think, oh, that's normal to talk about your parents like that. So here's another one. Seriously sassy, pinch me, I'm dreaming. And so listen to how this person talks about, this is on the first page, about her parents. For goodness sake, Pip, Mum howls as she rushes along the landing in her dressing gown, her face plastered with cucumber, 10 years younger mudpack. Where did you last see him? My best friend is sitting cross-legged on my rainbow rug, scribbling into her new pink notebook. Taslima wants to be a psychologist, and she's using my family as her first case study. Basically, she thinks we're all nuts, and sometimes I have to agree. I mean, how's Dad going to cope with the demands of running the country now he's an MP? he can't even run our house. So there's another little thing. It's just the norm to kind of think your parents are ridiculous and stupid and incapable. And just as a contrast to that, this is a lot of people know this one, Good Wives by Louisa May Alcott. So this is an old book, like, I don't know when, 1800 something. And this is how the daughters talk about their father. So to outsiders, the 5 energetic women, which is the mother and the 4 daughters, seemed to rule the house. And so they did in many things. But the quiet man sitting among his books was still the head of the family, the household conscience, anchor, and comforter. For to him, the busy, anxious women always turned in troublous times, finding him, in the truest sense of those sacred words, husband and father. The girls gave their hearts into their mother's keeping, their souls into their father's. And to both parents who lived and labored so faithfully for them, they gave a love that grew with their growth and bound them tenderly together by the sweetest tie which blesses life and outlives death. So the contrast between that and the books today is quite big.
Yes.
And I think, I don't know if you saw that, but they're all older fiction.
Yes.
But you'll find it in the various age groups as well. But it's like,
yeah, those ones would be books for 9 to 12-year-olds. So that was one thing that came out. The other thing I found was a similar attitude to siblings. So I'll just read a very short line from this book. And again, like a lot of these examples are kind of like right at the beginning of the book. You don't need to get very far to find this kind of material, you know.
You don't need to search, no.
So this is called The Parent Problem. And the first line is, "It is the last week of the Easter holidays, and I have just about had enough of being at home with my insane excuse for a brother, Harris." So that's how she talks about her brother, an insane excuse for a brother. And it goes on to tell the annoying things he's doing. So, and as a contrast, here's an old book. So again, I don't know, 100 years old.
Yep. What's that one?
This one is called 5 Little Peppers and How They Grew by Margaret Sidney. And it's talking about the 2 children, Polly and Ben. Many and vast were their secret plans by which they were to astonish their mother at some future day, which they would only confide, as they did everything else, to one another. For this, brother and sister were everything to each other and stood loyally together through thick and thin. So that's how you talk about your siblings 100 years ago. And I mean, that's one example. There are, you know, you could find heaps of examples, but we don't really have the time for that.
No, that's really quite. It does show, you know, really impressively the difference between the attitudes today and well, only a few years ago, really.
Yeah. So I think what you touched on before, Sharon, about like bad character traits sort of being made to look funny or acceptable by just seeming normal and particularly humorous. Kids are meant to laugh at bad character traits. I think that's a massive one that's really coming out. And this is kind of just a simple example. This is a picture book, Boom Baby Boom Boom by Margaret Mayhew, who's one of the biggest picture book authors in New Zealand.
Yes.
And through this book, the baby's given a nutritious lunch to eat. So this is the kind of subtle message, you know, your very young child might get. So the mum gives her a nice lunch to eat. And then for some reason, I'm not sure why, the mum says, "Oh, I'll just bang away on my drum in the corner while you eat your lunch." So she bangs away on her drum and the baby proceeds to chuck all of her food onto the floor. And then at the end of the book, the mum turns around and she hasn't seen that all the food's been chucked. and actually some animals have come in and eaten the food. And the mum at the end says, "Oh, what a good baby you are," and she kisses her and gives her a banana, and then the baby eats it up. So it's kind of like, okay, great, the baby gets away with chucking all the food on the floor, and that's actually okay. There's no sort of consequence, and actually the mum looks pretty stupid for not realizing. So that's like a picture book. And then another book that I thought was an interesting one, because this guy here, David Williams, is a really big author at the moment. So a lot of kids are reading his stuff. The World's Worst Children. Interestingly, at the front, he sort of has a mock letter from the Queen, Her Majesty the Queen, and he says in here that he's a bit surprised he hasn't been awarded an honour yet, called Dame David Williams. So you're thinking, okay, a bit of gender confusion in here. What's that about? I don't know what that's about either. But then you have stories in this book about really badly behaved children, and the consequences are really unclear. They're really ambiguous as to whether there's any sort of consequence for their behaviour. So there's one story about a girl called Stacey, who thinks that she's a great singer, and she gets up on the stage and she sings so badly the house crashes down and everybody dies, and then she gets picked out of the rubble and she wants to know whether she gets through to the next round. So there's no sort of unclear. It's just a funny story, but you're not sure what are the kids meant to learn from that? What's the lesson? Yeah, and there's other ones in that book. So I thought, I thought that was pretty interesting. In fact, I think we talked last week about the study done on the moral lessons in literature. I don't know if you remember, we talked about the 4th grade readers, and they did a study on the 4th grade readers back in the 1850s, and saw down through time the moral lessons just kind of plummeted. So in 1810, 16 pages out of 25 pages had some kind of a lesson, and by 1950, 0.06 pages had any kind of a moral lesson. So you can just see just through the numbers that it's dropped.
Yes.
Yeah. It's quite scary statistics, really.
And you don't need to have there doesn't need to be a painfully obvious moral lesson on every page of a story. It doesn't need to be that sort of purposeful all the time, but there needs to be some virtue that kids learn through story.
And that's the power of story, is that it does bring across a lesson and a moral principle and an example for them to follow.
That's right.
And here's the thing, I guess, if you went to the library and just got out the new books, some of them might be fine. There might not necessarily be something bad in it, but if they only ever read stuff that is kind of neutral, and then some of the other stuff that is really bad, that's not giving them the opportunity that some of the literature was able to do and can do for our kids, to give them this wonderful heritage that they can grow up with and learn from. I mean, stories is one of the greatest ways to learn, about the world, about morals, about how to interact with people. Sorry.
Absolutely. Way better than reading a theory book.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Way more fun.
So what are some of the books that you find that are favourites of yours that you really find portray some really good morals and great stories?
One that comes to mind, I think we talked about last time, is The Brave Irene by William Steig, not sure how to pronounce his name, where a girl takes a dress that her mother has made. Her mum's a dressmaker. She takes it through the snow to deliver it to the Duchess on time, and she has to face a lot of challenges to get there, but she does it out of love for her mother. Right. And so, you learn as a child that you do things for your parents. You love your parents, and you you want to please them and help them. There's another book called Sarah and Simon No Red Paint, and it's a similar deal where their father is a poor painter and they spend the whole book trying to find some paint for him to use so he can make money. So those are ones that come to mind in terms of virtue. There's this book here, which is a Julia Donaldson book, A Squash and a Squeeze. I don't know if you know that one. But
Yes.
you know that? So the lady thinks her house is too small. She goes to a wise old man and he says, bring in your hens and your ducks and your cows and then in the end she realizes actually she needs to be content with what she's got, right?
Yeah.
So you learn a great lesson just through that book, just from reading that book.
Yeah.
And you don't need to preach at your kids. You just enjoy the story.
Enjoy the
And
story.
they
Yeah, that's right.
You know?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's some of the chapter books that we've read recently. There was one called Plain Girl, which was about an Amish girl, and she ends up with a moral dilemma because the Amish society, they weren't allowed to wear normal clothing. They had to wear sort of long dresses and white aprons.
No buttons.
No buttons. Yeah, and you learn a lot about society, the Amish society, which is another thing great books do. You learn so much. It's not a textbook, but you're learning all the time about a theme or an era or a culture. But she has this dilemma where she really wants to try on this girl at school's pretty pink dress, but she knows her mum doesn't want her to. And so as the reader and as your kids, they're thinking, oh, what is she going to do? Is she going to disobey her parents, or is she going to obey them? And then in the end, she obeys her parents. Both the girls decide that actually their parents wouldn't want them swapping clothes, and they obey. But it's a great little lesson you learn, you know. No one would have known. Her parents wouldn't have known whether she'd done it or not, but she chose to be obedient because she loved her parents.
Yeah.
So and there's some books I've read about the World War II era. So there's one called 20 and 10, where a group of 20 French children are asked to hide a group of 10 Jewish children in their midst. And so it's very dangerous for them. If they're caught, you know, there'd be massive consequences. But you're reading this book and your kids are also having to ask themselves, would they be brave enough to do that, to hide a bunch of Jewish kids, to put their own lives in danger? So, you know, those kind of lessons of courage and bravery, integrity, you know, you can learn so much through a great book, and everyone just has a great time reading it.
Yeah. So when we chatted last time, you talked about the power of pictures as well, and the illustrations.
Yeah.
Can you talk me through that?
Yeah. So I've got a couple of, like, this is the general picture book from the picture book section, which you can see. So you can see the pictures are kind of quite plain. I don't know if you can see that.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good.
So they're quite sort of two-dimensional. Yeah, quite plain, not a lot of detail. So that would be quite a typical book. And another thing I wanted to show, just from the older fiction as well. So this is an older fiction book called Tom Gates' What Monster? And when you open the pages, they're filled with little cartoony like pictures all over the show.
Yes.
That's kind of your typical style of art, which, you know, is fine. I don't have a big problem with cartoons and comics. I read, you know, Asterix and Tintin, and, you know, there's a place for that kind of art.
I agree.
But I think, you know, it's really, you agree? Did you say?
Yeah. Definitely. Best history lessons.
That's right. I know. Look at the history you learn from Asterix.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think there's also a place for introducing kids to really great art, really fantastic artwork. In fact, I was reading from a book the other night, and one of my children said that. She said, "Oh, the paintings are so beautiful, Mum." She noticed how beautiful the art was. So this is probably my favorite picture book just because of the art, called When Jessie Came Across the Sea, and illustrated by PJ Lynch. But you know, so here's a young girl with her grandmother sewing. So every page is a really detailed, beautiful picture that you just want to look at. Here's the rabbi, and you can see kind of just the detail and the dimension, the textures in the artwork.
So the pictures tell their own story, don't they? Really?
Yeah, they do. Yep. And my
Even
favorite
pictures tell a story.
That's right. My favorite picture of all is this one here. Is they're coming, they're watching the Statue of Liberty and coming to America. You can kind of see the hope on their faces. I don't know if you can see that.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
No, hope,
really,
you know, it's all there just in the pictures, even without the words. So
yes.
It's really nice to introduce kids to great artwork and get them to appreciate good art. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I again, like, I think, you know, I'd like to say here that we're not here to tell anyone what they can and cannot show their kids. I think the main message is that, you know, when we started looking at what's in the libraries now, we felt that, you know, a lot of it, I don't know that I'm that happy to constantly have these messages being brought across. So I think the main message is just to be aware of what is in those books. There are some undercurrent messages that are being pushed big time now, and that's filtering through into the libraries, even into the picture books. So we just need to be a bit more selective and a bit more careful, if we don't want to, I guess, poison the minds of our kids with you know, just with, as you said, making a joke of certain things that we actually value. And it's better to, I guess, we feel to you know, at least give, for the majority of it, to give the kids good food rather than junk food as their main staple, because you can inspire them so much with these stories. Stories will be in their minds.
Do you find that the good books and the morals and the good stories just help lead on to talking about godly principles, and, you know, just taking that next step into talking about God's ways? Do you find that they're a good segue into doing that?
Yep. Yeah. My problem is often we read aloud right before lunch, and because we're enjoying our story so much, we read a second chapter.
Right.
By the time we've finished that, I really need to get lunch done.
Yes.
But I really feel that this is something I need to improve on as well, is, you know, once you do finish a chapter of a book, it's a great opportunity to talk about things like, you know, ask questions like, who do you think was the most courageous? You know, what would you have done in this kind of a situation? And that's something I need to do more. So, I mean, you think about Christ, who taught with a lot of stories, you know, the Good Samaritan, and then he said to them, which one do you think was neighbor to him that fell among the thieves? That's what he did, wasn't it? He told a story, and then he asked them for their response.
Yeah, challenge them.
I have had it
the meaning behind it.
Yeah. I have had it a few times where, not necessarily when we've read a book or a story, but later on maybe we do the readings, or they're trying to understand some point that I've made, and one of them will actually say, oh, it's a bit like in this book, that character, right? Or they're asking me, is that a little bit like that? And that's happened a few times.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're putting the stories and going, well, here's a principle. They're pulling out the principles themselves. That's great. Yeah. So what do you do if you're at the library? Because I tell you, you get most of your books from the library, and you got your kids with you, and they've got past that age of just pulling all the books off the shelves, and you're chasing them around. But instead, they're picking up books that they want to take, and you notice in there that there's a couple of books that you don't really like. What do you do?
I normally just say we're not having that one.
Oh yeah, okay.
They normally just show me their books and I have a quick flick through, and when you come to chapter books you can see pretty quickly if it's going to be junk food or if it's going to be a good book if you just skim reading. So I tend to try and just check what they're getting out and just say no, we're not taking that one home. But I think, you know, our oldest reads a lot of books and I can't literally read through every single book that she reads. So there comes a point where they kind of need to learn to discern for themselves and know what makes a good book and not a good book. And in fact, I've kind of been hiding all these bad books in my bedroom, trying to keep them away from the kids. And she kind of found them a little bit and has come to me and said, "Oh, Mum, that book's terrible." You know, so I can see she recognizes that it's an unhealthy book. You know, and they're probably going to come across some stuff that's not that great. They're going to have to go through that process of reading some bad stuff perhaps to know what is good and to realize, okay, these are the good books. Yeah, but I just tend to make sure I flick through all the books before we get them out. Okay. And actually, I order quite a few books online. So I tend to use Book Depository because they have free shipping and they're not too expensive. But I think if you really want to grow your home library and get some good books, you almost need to go and order some books and buy them if you can, rather than just rely on the library, because a lot of the good titles are actually just not in the libraries. They're very difficult to get hold of. So
okay,
yeah, that's what I've done.
And you are writing a list of good books, aren't you?
Yeah, so yeah, I've done the one on picture books. So there's a few books just for people to get started on. It's not comprehensive. You know, I haven't read every good picture book, but that's kind of like the first in a series that I'm trying to do, just as a bit of a resource. So the next one will be on like younger chapter books for 5 to 8 year olds. And then there'll be another one on sort of books for 9 to 12 year olds. Yeah.
Yeah, that's for Brother David Bailey's Will in His Voice website.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, we'll put the link up to your first article on that afterwards on the chat. So if anyone's interested in having a look at that, and I'll send it through in the next email as well. So yeah.
So who does most of the reading? Do you take it turnabout, or is it mostly you, Michelle, because you are doing you're doing the homeschooling, or how does it look in your family?
So I've done different things. I used to read straight after breakfast and would sit down and read a few different things. So I'd read from a history book and a science book, and then poetry, and then would read our novel, which was always kind of like the favourite part. Read science and get to the novel. It's what all the kids are waiting for. So at the moment, though, I'm reading just before lunch. So about 11:30 to 12:30, we'll sit down and read. Yeah, and the kids will, sometimes they colour in or draw, or, you know, I don't expect them to sit all still and I think it's fine if they do stuff with their hands. Yeah.
With a varied age group, do you pitch it at a certain age, or how do you work it in your family?
Yeah, so probably it's been pitched more at the older two for a while. And now that Maria is 13, I'm actually going back and rereading some of the books that we read years ago. And that's more pitched at the middle of the family at the moment. So my 7-year-old and 10-year-old. And the 5-year-old is sort of a bit sketchy as to how much she gets. I'm not sure. So I would say, in general, it's maybe best to pitch sort of at the middle or at the top end of your family, and your younger ones will get something. They'll absorb something, and you can always like repeat the books, because actually reading them again is a great thing. You don't have to read them just once. You'll get more from a second reading. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And do you use voices and expression?
Yeah. I try my best. Put on my best American accent when that's necessary.
Oh, you do it well too.
Yeah, the kids hate the American accent actually.
Okay. You did well with the Italian one the other night too when we were chatting.
Right. Yeah. Put on the Italian. Yeah. Sometimes I get a bit mixed up, but I do my best.
American, Italian, French, whatever.
something foreign.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
Toby, do you
Mishael
read
definitely,
as well?
yeah. So Mishael definitely reads much more than I do, but at the moment we try and read. We do after the readings in the evening. I'll read a chapter or two from one of the books that we want to read out loud as well. So I try and do at least a chapter a day. You know, if we can.
Yes.
Yeah. Tonight we didn't, and they were very disappointed.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
So at the moment we're reading through The Borrowers, which is one of my favorite books actually to read out loud for the kids. I love reading The Borrowers. Yeah.
Okay. So what's the storyline of The Borrowers?
So The Borrowers is about these little people. They're only about that big, who live in your house and who borrow things like your needles and all the things that you tend to lose in the house.
Yes.
Which is why you lose them, I suppose.
Yeah, and they I guess live of what we humans drop and what have you, and it's a very it sort of pulls you into this world, you know, that it's a great story. Yeah. And it's great because there's 5 books in the series. So it's a little bit like Little House on the Prairie, which is another favorite one to read out loud, because you've got a whole series that you can just, you know, work your way through, and you get to know the characters, and you can live the story with them, you know.
Yeah.
So have your girls got favorite books that they like to keep coming back to?
Yeah, well, like the books, interestingly, the books that I read aloud to my 5-year-old. So when she could read on her own, when she was 7 or 8, she came back and reread all of those books that she'd heard through her ear herself with her eyes multiple times.
Little House on the Prairie,
Little House
one
on
of
the
them.
Prairie, and there's a whole bunch of them. So she read a lot of those. I think actually both my older 2 girls started reading on The Famous Five by Enid Blyton, which is also what I started reading on. So I think some of those kind of series books are really too. Yeah, some of those series books are really great for that, because it just gets you into reading. You know, you get to the end and you just get the next book in the series, and it just gets your reading just gets better fast when you read a series like that on your own.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it depends on their interests. One of my girls loves horses, so she loves some series like The Pony Pals and Saddle Club, which are not like great books, but she loves them. So, you know, it's getting her better at reading.
Yep.
Yeah.
So here's a question for you. This is going to put you on the spot. Who do your kids like listening to the most, Mum or Dad?
It's a good question.
I don't actually know. We'd have to ask them.
Just wondering.
I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that, you know, hearing a dad's voice and read aloud is really nice for kids. That was my experience growing up. I loved it when my dad read to us. So I think if dads can read aloud, it's a really great thing for kids.
Yeah. So what would you say to encourage dads? I mean, there's going to be a couple of dads listening now who, you know, maybe aren't reading as often as they should.
Or could.
Yeah.
What would you say to a dad to encourage them to read?
Yeah,
to
I mean,
kids, those kids.
It is actually quite an easy way to spend a bit of time with your kids, where, you know, if you're tired, you come home from work, you know, it's actually quite an easy way to spend some quality time with your kids, and they'll love it. You don't need to listen to them talk, you know. You can just read a nice little story, you know, and that's I think that's a good way, particularly, you know, if mum has to prepare tea, or you've got a half an hour where mum just needs a bit of extra time, just read them a story, and if you do that regularly, the kids will love it. You know, I think it's actually an easy thing to do with your kids. You know, I mean,
and a good way to keep them quiet too. You're reading a story, they're not running around the room and tearing the place apart.
Yeah. I think, you know, choosing a book that you like as a dad, you know, don't just choose some book because it's on a book list and you hate it. You know, choose a book that you really enjoy.
Yeah.
And that you're motivated to read. And like Toby would read quite a few of the books I'd get home, and then he'd say, oh, I really want to read that book. So he'd sort of choose the books he wants to read in the evening.
Absolutely.
And I think another really important thing is to always peg your read aloud to a certain time of day, and just do it at the same time of day, so you get into that kind of habit and routine. Your kids know it's read aloud time now. I think that just helps kids, and it helps you as a parent to make sure it happens.
Yeah,
that's really good advice. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's definitely some books that, you know, I wouldn't want to read out loud. Just pick a book that you want to read. I think that's a really good.
You've got to enjoy it as an
piece
adult.
of advice. I mean,
Yeah.
even some of the younger readers, the picture books that my kids brought along. If I get too bored about it, I said, I'm not reading that to you. I don't have the patience.
Fair enough.
They'll do it. They'll bring me something else. You know, I don't have the patience to read a stupid book.
So there's a saying, C.S. Lewis wrote once, so the author of Chronicles of Narnia, that if a book is worth reading at age 10, it's worth reading at age 50. So and that applies to picture books and novels, everything. You know, if you enjoy something at age 50, then it's a good book.
Yes.
Yeah, and I must admit, I will probably get the Chronicles of Narnia out again at some stage and read them again, because I've always enjoyed them.
Yeah.
Well, and actually the other thing that I'll mention here, and we mentioned this last time, I think, if you're not so good at reading, audiobooks are a great way to actually enjoy books. There's some great, I mean, the Chronicles of Narnia have been read by some fantastic readers. We've listened to them, for example, in the car. You know, if we have a bigger car trip or whatever, we actually put that on for the whole family. People don't sit there in their own little world with their own earbuds in, and we actually use it as a family time that we all spend together listening to some great stories being read out. And there is some really great audiobooks out now with some fantastic readers. You know, I mean, I can't read like that to my kids, and you know, there's some books that I probably won't read to my kids because someone else has done a much better job than I have. You know, I can't compare with that.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, the books are much better than the movie.
They always are. Yep.
Yeah. So, no, that's cool. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you wanted to ask?
Well, I think it's probably, we're heading for time where we can just open it up for a bit of discussion and chat time, which is great. But yeah, really appreciate the research you've put into this and just opening our eyes to it, because, you know, before you've talked about it, there is so much that even myself as an adult, you get a little bit desensitized to, because it's so prevalent in the world around you, and that unless it's pointed out, you stop seeing it anymore because it's normal.
That's right.
And to point out the fact that we have lost a lot of the lovely virtues that were perhaps there in the older books. It reignites a real passion to read some good literature and to read books that just really feed the soul and really feed the mind in a really positive way.
That's right.
Thank you so much.
That's fine. I think books will always reflect the culture and society in which they're written. You know?
That's true. Yes.
So, and that's why going for older books is a good thing, because in general society was more Bible based and more based on, you know, biblical virtues, and that's all been lost. So
that's true.
That's true. Yeah.
Godly morals are just not a thing of today.
That's right.
It's very much more humanistic now, I think. So
So perhaps there's a call out there for anyone listening at the moment who fancies themselves as a good kids book author. We really need some decent kids books out there.
That's right. We need you. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much, Tobi and Mishael. We really appreciate your time tonight. It's been really good, and it's just so important to be able to steer our kids in the right direction. And you know, whether our kids or our grandkids or our nephews or nieces or Sunday school students or whatever they are, it's really important to have that awareness of what there is out there and be able to channel that in the right direction. So thank you so much for bringing our attention to that. We really appreciate it.
Research put into it.
Yeah. Next week we have a break, and then we have so the following few weeks we have new subjects. The porn subject with Gary Steele. So it's a really important one. It's about a third to a half of guys struggle with pornography. So whether you're a wife or a husband or whatever, tune in for that because it is so important. And yeah, just find out how guys are struggling with that and what we can do to help. November the 9th, we'll have a break. November the 16th, this should be a fun one. Gender differences and marriage with Mark Vincent. And then on the 30th of November, we'll have another bit of a fun one, thriving with kids in the holidays. And I will tell you about who's on that at a later time.